Imagine a world without murder, without crime, without the stain of blood spilled by human hands. This world existed, and it wasn't that long ago in the countdown of eternity, but in a single day, everything changed. The first blow, the first silenced scream, the first body fallen upon the earth still virgin to violence. And what's most disturbing, this crime didn't happen in the shadows, wasn't planned by hardened criminals, wasn't born of greed for gold or power. It was born from something much closer to you than you imagine. It was born within a family, between siblings, in the hearts of those who brought offerings to God. The story of Cain and Abel is not just the account of an ancient murder recorded in the pages of Genesis. It is the dark mirror of the human soul, the stark portrait of how envy can transform love into hate, admiration into resentment, and devotion into destruction. It is the narrative that explains why wars begin, why friendships end, why families fall apart. Because everything that happened on that field, on that fateful day, continues to happen today inside you, inside me, inside every heart that has ever felt the burning pain of seeing another shine while remaining in the shadows. But here's what few understand. Cain didn't wake up one day determined to kill. The tragedy was built brick by brick, thought by thought, in a silent escalation that began long before the blood touched the ground. It began with a question that tormented Cain and Eve, torments millions to this day. Why did God say yes to him and no to me? Why was my brother's offering accepted and mine rejected? Where is the justice in that? This question, left unanswered in Cain's mind, became poison, and poison, when not expelled, kills. What you are about to discover goes beyond a simple biblical story. You will understand the anatomy of a crime that defined the fate of humanity. You will see the signs Cain ignored, the warnings he disregarded, the seemingly small choices that culminated in the irreparable. You will recognize these same signs operating in your own life, in your relationships, in your reactions to perceived injustice. And most importantly, you will learn what Cain should have done, but didn't. The path that could have prevented it all. The answer God offered, but was refused. Prepare for a journey to history's first battlefield, where there were no armies, only two hearts, where there were no forged weapons, only the stone lifted by a hand, trembling with anger, where there were no human judges, only the gaze of God witnessing the unthinkable. This is the truth about Cain and Abel. This is the truth about us. In the beginning, there were only 4 people on the face of the earth: Adam, Eve, and their 2 sons, Cain and Abel. A small family in a gigantic world, working together to survive, to cultivate, to build something from scratch. Cain, the firstborn, became a tiller of the soil, perhaps following in the footsteps of his father, who had been placed in Eden to tend the land. Abel, the youngest, became a shepherd, guiding flocks through the green fields that stretched beneath the still pure sky. 2 brothers, 2 different but seemingly complementary vocations. Everything seemed to be in order, until the day they decided to bring offerings to the Lord. The biblical text is direct and disturbing in its simplicity. Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground, and Abel brought of the firstborn of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he did not have regard. Here begins the mystery that spans millennia. Why? Why was one offering accepted and the other rejected? Cain didn't bring just any fruit. He brought of the fruit of his ground, of his labor, of his sweat. Abel brought of the firstborn, it is true, the best of the flock. But didn't Cain deserve at least a word of recognition for his effort? Was God unjust? This question tormented Cain, and it still torments those who read this story without understanding what was really happening. Because you see, the problem was never the type of offering, whether it was vegetable or animal, whether it came from the land or the flock. The problem was in the heart of the one offering. Abel brought the best he had, the firstborn, the fat, what cost the most, what was worth the most, what represented a genuine sacrifice. Cain brought the fruit of the land, but the text doesn't say it was the first fruits. It doesn't say it was the best. It doesn't say there was the same spirit of total surrender that was present in Abel's offering. And God, who sees beyond appearances, who weighs hearts and not just outward gestures, recognized the difference. Not because he wanted to humiliate Cain, but because true worship is never about what you carry in your hands, but about what you carry in your heart. But Cain didn't see it that way. No one likes to see their offering, rejected while their brothers is applauded. No one likes to feel like they weren't enough, that they fell short, that they didn't achieve the desired approval. And herein lies the first great lesson of this story. Rejection is the ultimate test of character. When you are rejected, when your offering isn't accepted, when your work isn't recognized, when your effort seems invisible while others are praised, what happens inside you? Do you turn inward, seeking to improve, to understand where you went wrong, to grow? Or do you turn against those who were approved, against those who shone, against those who achieved what you couldn't? Cain's response was the latter, and that's when everything began to fall apart. The text says that Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. In other words, the rejection didn't remain hidden within him. It leaked out, becoming visible in his face, his posture, his way of walking and talking. Anyone looking at Cain at that moment would see a man overcome with bitterness. And it is precisely here that God does something extraordinary. He doesn't abandon Cain to his wrath. He doesn't reject him as a person simply because he rejected the offering. On the contrary, God approaches and asks a question that is both an invitation and a warning. Why were you angry? And why was your countenance fallen? It was a golden opportunity. It was an open door for dialogue, for reflection, for a change of direction. But Cain didn't respond. And when God speaks and you choose stubborn silence, you choose the path of destruction. God kept speaking because divine love persists even when we are deaf. He told Cain something that should be engraved in the mind of every person who has ever felt envy. If you do well, will there not be acceptance for you? In other words, Cain, the problem is not your brother. The problem is not that I have favorites. The problem is not that life is unfair. If you do what is right, if you bring the best, if you offer with a sincere heart, you too will be accepted. The door is open. The path is clear. There is no mystery here. Just do what you know you should do. But then came the second part of the divine message, the chilling part. If you do not do well, sin lies at the door. It is there, waiting, like a predator crouching, ready to pounce, and its desire is to dominate you. But you must dominate it. It was a clear, direct warning, impossible to misinterpret. God was saying, Cain, you are in danger. There is something dark growing inside you. If you don't deal with it now, if you don't choose the right path, this monster will devour you. And what's more, you have the power to defeat it. You are not a slave to your anger. You can choose differently. You can master this impulse. I am giving you this chance. I am showing you the way out. Take it. But Cain didn't. He heard God's words and ignored them, because he had already made a decision in his heart. He had already chosen another path. And herein lies the most frightening truth of this story. Sin always offers a false solution to real pain. Envy whispers, if you can't climb to its height, pull it down to your height. And Cain heard that whisper. What happened next is told in a few words, but each one carries an unbearable weight. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. While they were in the field, Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. There was no army. There was no battle. There was no self-defense or accident. It was premeditated, deliberate, coldly executed. Cain called Abel to the field, away from witnesses, away from his parents, to a secluded place where he could do the unthinkable without interruption. And there, with his own hands, he extinguished his brother's life. Abel's blood, for the first time in history, cried out from the earth, and the world would never be the same again. Consider the horror of that moment. Abel had no reason to suspect. It was his brother asking to go to the field together. Perhaps he even imagined Cain wanted to talk, to reconcile, to overcome the tension between them. He was innocent, unarmed, trusting, and he was killed for that trust. He was murdered not by a stranger, not by an enemy, but by the person he had grown up with, played with, worked alongside, the ultimate betrayal, history's first Judas, but with even more immediate and brutal consequences. And when it was all over, when Abel's body lay motionless on the earth, when heavy silence replaced his last breath, Cain looked at his red-stained hands and realized there was no going back. What was done could not be undone. The dead did not return, and the guilt, oh the guilt, came like a tsunami. But even so, Cain was not immediately abandoned by God. In a display of patience that defies human comprehension, God approached again and asked another question. "Where is Abel, your brother?" Not because God didn't know. God knew very well where Abel was. The question was a last chance for Cain too. Confess, repent, and seek mercy. But Cain's answer was the icing on the cake of tragedy. "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Lies and arrogance in the same sentence. Denial and contempt combined. Cain not only killed Abel, now he was lying to God, feigning innocence, throwing sarcasm in the Creator's face. It was a complete descent into the moral abyss. And then judgment came. God said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Here is a truth that transcends time. Innocent blood spilled never remains silent. It cries out for justice. It echoes in the corridors of eternity. There is no point in hiding the body, no point in pretending nothing happened, no point in lying or deflecting. The blood speaks, and God listens. The sentence was then pronounced, "Cursed are you from the ground that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you will be on the earth." Cain, the farmer, lost his connection to the earth. His vocation was destroyed by his own crime. He who loved to cultivate, to plant, to see things grow, would now till in vain. The earth that drank Abel's blood would refuse to feed the murderer. What's more, he would be a wanderer, without peace, without rest, without a home, a life of perpetual restlessness. Cain's response is one of the most revealing phrases in all of Scripture. "My wickedness is greater than can be. Forgiven." He finally acknowledged the gravity of what he had done. But note, he didn't say, "I have sinned against my brother." He didn't say, "I have wronged you, God." There was no genuine repentance. What there was fear of the consequences. He continued, "Behold, today you have driven me from the face of the earth, and from your face I will be hidden. I will be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Cain was afraid, pure terror, because now he was vulnerable. Now he was prey. And he knew that if anyone found him and learned what he had done, vengeance would come swiftly. Blood for blood, life for life. And here something happens that many don't understand. Something that reveals the complexity of divine justice in a way that confounds even the most studious. God said to Cain, "Whoever kills Cain will be avenged sevenfold." And the Lord set a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would harm him. That's right, God protected Cain. He marked him with a sign that served as a warning. "This man is under my protection. Do not touch him. Vengeance is not yours." This is disconcerting, isn't it? Cain, the first murderer, the man who killed his own brother after receiving clear warnings from God, now receives divine protection? How does this make sense? Where is the justice in this? The answer lies in God's sovereignty and the nature of true justice. God wasn't saying Cain was forgiven or that the crime didn't matter. He was establishing a fundamental principle. Justice belongs to God, not to men driven by hatred or revenge. If Cain were killed by another, it would only perpetuate the cycle of violence he himself started. One murder leading to another, and another, and another, without end. The mark of Cain, therefore, was not a visible curse, as many imagine. It was a protection. It was God saying, "I deal with Cain. I execute justice. You humans do not turn revenge into justice, because if you do, the world will become an endless hell of retaliation." And indeed, Cain lived, but he lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden, far from God's presence, far from his family, far from everything he knew. He built a city, had descendants, continued to exist, but he never again found peace. He never again had the communion he lost. He never again felt the earth respond to his work. He lived, yes, but what kind of life was that? A wandering, restless life, haunted by what he had done, forever marked as the man who inaugurated the endless list of murderers that would come after him. And here we come to the central point, the lesson that pulses at the heart of this bloody and tragic narrative. Envy kills. Not metaphorically, literally. It killed Abel at the hands of Cain, and it continues to kill people every day in various ways. Sometimes it kills literally, in crimes of passion, in domestic violence, in attacks motivated by jealousy and resentment. Other times it kills relationships, destroys friendships, tears families apart, poisons workplaces. Envy is the cancer of the soul that starts small, a distorted cell of comparison, and if not removed, spreads until it consumes everything. Do you recognize the symptoms? The difficulty in rejoicing in another's victory, the secret satisfaction when someone you envy fails, the compulsive need to belittle others' achievements, the distorted interpretation that their success is your defeat, that their brilliance dims your light. This is envy. And if Cain were here, he would tell you, don't feed it, don't let it grow, because the end is always destructive. Modern psychology confirms what the story of Cain revealed millennia ago. Envy is a fundamentally destructive emotion because it arises from comparison and feeds on the perception of injustice. When you look at someone and think, why does he have it and I don't? You're activating the same circuits in your brain that Cain activated that day. And these circuits, when repeatedly fed, create toxic thought patterns. You begin to see the world through the lens of scarcity. If he has it, I can't have it. If he rises, I fall. If he is loved, I am rejected. But the truth is different. The truth is that there is room for everyone to shine. Abel's acceptance didn't mean Cain's eternal rejection. It simply meant that in that moment, in that specific offering, there was something wrong in Cain's heart that needed to be fixed. And if he had accepted this, if he had turned inward, instead of against Abel, everything would have been different. But Cain chose the path of externalization. He shifted the blame. The problem was Abel. The problem was God. The problem was the injustice of the universe. The problem was never himself. And this is the fatal trap of envy. It convinces you that you are the victim, that your anger is justified, that your bitterness is understandable. And perhaps it is understandable, but that doesn't make it right. Because in the end, when you act out of envy, you are not punishing the one who made you suffer. You are destroying yourself. Cain didn't just kill Abel on that field. He killed his own soul, his own peace, his own chance at redemption, and he carried that with him for the rest of his life. Now, what if Cain had chosen differently? What if, when God asked, "Why are you angry?" Cain had stopped, taken a deep breath, and said, "You're right, I'm angry, but anger is revealing something in me that needs to change. I didn't give my best. I offered, but I didn't offer with all my heart. Can I try again? Can I learn from my brother instead of envying him?" Imagine how different everything would be. Abel would still be alive, Cain would still have his calling, the family would still be united, and humanity would have learned early on that the path of humility and self-improvement is infinitely better than the path of envy and violence. But that's not what happened. And why? Because it's hard. It's painful to admit that the problem is within you. It's humiliating to acknowledge that you were wrong, that you weren't enough, that you need to change. It's much easier, much more immediate, to blame the other. And it was this easy choice that cost everything. The story of Cain and Abel doesn't end with Abel's death or Cain's exile. It reverberates throughout human history. Every time brothers divide over inheritance, every time colleagues sabotage each other for promotion, every time friends drift apart because one prospered and the other didn't. Every time you feel that pang in your chest when you see someone achieve what you desire, there are Cain and Abel again, repeating the same pattern, facing the same choice. And the question God asked Cain, he is asking you now. If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do the right thing, if you bring your best, if you offer yourself with a sincere heart, will approval not come? The way is open, the door is there, but you must choose to enter it. And what about the mark of Cain, that mysterious protection God placed upon him? It teaches us something profound about grace and justice. Even when we deserve the worst punishment, even when we fail in the most spectacular way possible, God still sees value in preserving life. Not because sin is ignored, but because human life, even corrupted, still bears the image of the Creator. Cain was not just a murderer, he was a son of Adam, created in the image of God, and that image, though deeply damaged, was not entirely destroyed. Hence the protection, hence the mark. Not to celebrate the crime, but to preserve life and give Cain the chance to bear the weight of his deed, to live with the consequences, and perhaps at some point in his wandering journey, find a way back to something resembling redemption. But let's be honest, Cain's redemption never happened, at least not in the pages of Scripture. He lived, he built, he had children, but we never read about genuine repentance, about reconciliation with God, about peace found. And perhaps that's the hardest lesson. Some choices have irreversible consequences. You can be forgiven, you can be protected, you can continue living, but you can't undo what you did. Abel doesn't return. The blood spilled doesn't return to your veins. Lost innocence isn't restored, and Cain had to live with that. Every day when he woke up, the first thing he remembered was, I killed my brother. I destroyed my family. I threw away my life because of envy. And there is no second chance to fix that specific thing. There are second chances for other things. There is mercy to move on. But that specific act remains as a monument to his failure, forever. So what do you do with this story? How do you apply it to your life today, thousands of years later, in a world so different from the field where Abel fell? You start by recognizing envy when it appears, because it will. It's part of the human condition. You'll look at someone and feel that pang. Why them and not me? And the moment you feel that, you have a choice. You can feed the feeling, ruminate on it, let it grow, transform it into resentment, bitterness, and eventually, destructive action. Or you can do what Cain didn't. You can look within. You can ask, what is this envy revealing about me? Where am I failing? What do I need to improve? How can I do better instead of just wishing the other person would do worse? And here's the secret that changes everything. When you transform envy into inspiration, when you use another's success as fuel for your own growth rather than poison for your soul, you break the cycle. You choose the path Cain refused. You conquer the sin that lurks at the door rather than be conquered by it. And this isn't easy. It isn't natural. It isn't the default response of the fallen human heart, but it is possible. It's exactly what God told Cain. You can conquer it. You have that capacity. You are not a slave to your worst nature. You can choose to be better. And every time you make that choice, every time you genuinely rejoice in the victory of someone you might envy, every time you offer your best without comparing yourself to another, you are rewriting the story of Cain and Abel. You are choosing the ending that should have happened, but didn't. There's something more to this story that needs to be said, something about offerings and acceptance. Many people carry the pain of having offered what they had, what they could, their best at the time, and still feeling it wasn't enough, feeling that God, or life, or circumstances rejected their offering. And this pain is real. But Cain's lesson isn't that you should always get it right the first time. It's that when your offering isn't accepted, when your effort isn't recognized, when you feel you've given your best and it still wasn't enough, the answer isn't to give up or rebel. The answer is to learn. It's to ask, what can I do differently? How can I improve? Where did I go wrong? And then, try again, with more wisdom, with more sincerity, with more commitment. Because God didn't reject Cain as a person. He rejected that specific offering and immediately offered a path to acceptance. If you do well, won't there be acceptance? The door wasn't closed. It was wide open. But Cain chose to break down the door rather than enter through it. And that was his tragedy. The mark of Cain also teaches us how to deal with those who have erred greatly. How often do you see someone who has failed, sinned, or destroyed, and your first reaction is, this person should be eliminated, canceled, erased from existence? It's the instinct for revenge, the same one Cain feared from others. But God said, no, justice is mine. I'll handle it. You, human, don't become the executioner. Because when you assume the role of vigilante executioner, you become the very thing you condemn. You perpetuate the violence you claim to hate, and the world sinks another level into chaos. This doesn't mean there are no consequences. Cain suffered severe consequences. But it does mean there's a difference between justice and revenge, between consequences and cruelty, between accountability and total destruction. And God calls us to understand this difference. And Abel? What do we say about Abel, the innocent man who lost everything? Scripture says something powerful about him much later in the book of Hebrews. By faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts. And by this faith, after his death, he still speaks. He still speaks. Abel's blood cried out from the ground, but his faith speaks through the ages. He is remembered not as a victim, but as an example, as the man who offered his best, as the man whose worship was genuine, as the man who, even unjustly killed, still teaches. And this is a comforting truth. When you live with integrity, when you offer your best, when your heart is sincere, your life speaks. Even if you are cut short prematurely, even if others destroy you out of envy, even if you don't see the full fruits of what you planted, You still speak. Your example still resonates, and that cannot be taken away from you. Now let me ask you a direct, blunt question. Where are you in this story? Are you Cain, feeling that envy growing, that anger building because someone was recognized and you weren't? Are you Abel, living with integrity, but suffering at the hands of those who envy you? Or are you the earth, a silent witness, absorbing the blood of the violence happening around you and crying out for justice? Perhaps you are a little of each at different times, but the question is, what will you do with it? When envy knocks on your door, and it will knock, will you open it? Will you invite it in, serve it tea, let it settle into the room of your heart until it makes itself at home and begins to destroy everything from the inside out? Or will you do what Cain didn't? Recognize the danger, close the door, and choose the better path? Because ultimately, the story of Cain and Abel is about choices, small choices that lead to big consequences. The choice to give sincerely or mechanically. The choice to listen, to rebuke or ignore it. The choice to deal with anger or feed it. The choice to see the other as a threat or as an inspiration. The choice to grow or to destroy. And these choices don't happen once in a dramatic moment. They happen every day in small situations, in thoughts no one else sees, in reactions that seem insignificant but are building who you are becoming. Cain didn't suddenly become a murderer. He became a murderer through a series of bad choices, of ignored red flags, of ignored warnings, of rejected opportunities for change. And when he finally lifted the stone, when he finally struck the blow, he was no longer the Cain he had been. He was the result of all those choices. And the same happens to you, for better or worse. There's a detail in the story that goes unnoticed by many, but carries immense weight. Cain spoke to Abel. The text says this before recording the murder. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. What did he say? We don't know. Perhaps it was a seemingly normal conversation, a casual invitation to go to the field together. Or perhaps it was fraught with barely concealed tension, cutting words, veiled accusations. But whatever the case, there was a conversation. There was a moment when the two were face to face, still alive, still with a chance to resolve things differently. And then, in the field, far from witnesses, Cain made his final choice. He stood up against Abel, and it was all over. Think about how many times you've had conversations like this. Conversations where tension hung in the air, where something unsaid hovered between you, where there was an invisible fork in the road. This moment could lead to reconciliation or a rupture, and the direction it took depended on the words chosen, the tone used, the willingness to listen, or the determination to attack. How many relationships were saved because someone chose humility at that crucial moment? And how many were destroyed because pride won out, because anger spoke louder, because envy whispered the wrong answer and was obeyed? Cain and Abel live in these moments. They are present at every relational crossroads where you decide between building or destroying, between forgiving or condemning, between growing or stagnate in bitterness. The lesson about acceptance is also profound and painful. We all want to be accepted. We want our efforts to be seen, recognized, validated. We want someone to look at what we've done and say, "This is good. You are valuable. Your work matters." And when that acceptance doesn't come, when we are ignored, when others are praised while we remain invisible, the pain is real and sharp. But here's what Cain needed to understand, and you need to too. The rejection of an offer is not the rejection of your essence. You are not defined by a failure, by a failed attempt, by a door that closed. You are defined by how you respond to it. Cain allowed that rejection to define him. He became the rejected man, the resentful man, the bitter man. And this identity consumed him until nothing remained but anger and violence. But you can choose differently. You can look at rejection and say, "This hurts, this is hard, but it's not the end. I can learn from this. I can improve. I can try again, differently, with more wisdom." Rejection may be a brutal teacher, but it is a teacher. And the students who learn from it become better, stronger, wiser. Those who reject it, who refuse to see the lessons, who turn it into fuel for bitterness, become like Cain. And Cain's fate is not something anyone should desire. A life of wandering, a soul without peace, a heart that can never again genuinely connect with God or others because it is imprisoned by guilt and what could have been, but wasn't. There's also a family dimension to this story that can't be ignored. Imagine Adam and Eve, the first parents receiving the news. One son dead, the other a murderer. The family shattered in a way they never imagined possible. What indescribable pain, what unbearable weight. And what was their fault in this? They raised both children in the same environment, with the same principles, the same opportunities, but one chose one path and the other chose another. This teaches us that in the end, each person is responsible for their own choices. You can't blame your family for everything. You can't use your upbringing as an eternal excuse for your bad decisions. There comes a time when you need to take ownership of your life, your choices, and their consequences. Cain didn't kill Abel because Adam and Eve failed as parents. He killed because he chose to kill, and that choice was his alone. And what about divine protection in the midst of judgment? The mark of Cain shows us that even when God executes justice, even when there are severe consequences, there is still protection. There is still care. God does not completely abandon even those who have failed in the worst possible way. He sets limits. He says, "Thus far, but no further. You will suffer the consequences of what you have done, but I will not be the one to allow others to destroy you out of revenge. Because if I allow that, I will only be multiplying evil. I will be creating more Cain." And this calls us to reflect on how we treat those who have fallen, those who have erred, those who have failed monumentally. Are there consequences? Yes. Should there be accountability? Absolutely. But there is a line between accountability and destruction, between justice and cruelty, between correction and annihilation. And God shows us where that line is. Think about how many people today carry scars. Not physical scars like Cain's, but emotional, psychological, spiritual scars. Scars of shame for mistakes made. Scars of guilt for harm done. Scars of rejection for offers not accepted. And many of these people are wandering through life like Cain wandered the land of Nod, with no clear destination, no inner peace, fleeing from ghosts that haunt them wherever they go. But here's a liberating truth. Even if your scar is the result of your own bad choices, even if you've brought upon yourself the consequences you now bear, there's still protection available. There's still grace. There's still a God who says, "You've made a mistake. You will bear the weight of it, but I won't allow you to be utterly destroyed. I still see value in you. I still have a purpose for your life, even if it's different from what it could have been." The question is, will you accept this protection? Will you stop running? Will you stop hiding? Will you finally look at what you've done, acknowledge its gravity, take responsibility, and still move forward? Because it is possible to live after a mistake. It is possible to build after destruction. It is possible to have meaning after failure, but not while you're denying, lying, running away. Cain could have had a different story after exile if he had chosen genuine repentance, but he chose only to survive, only to exist, only to carry on. And there's a huge difference between continuing to live and truly living, between breathing and being truly alive, between existing and having purpose. Now let's return to envy, because that's the beating heart of this tragedy. Envy is insidious because it often disguises itself as justice. It whispers, "You're right to be upset. This isn't fair. You deserved more. He didn't deserve that." And it may even be true that there was injustice, that you were neglected, that others were unfairly favored. But here's the trick. Even if the injustice is real, envy is still the wrong poison to heal that wound, because envy doesn't seek to correct the injustice. It seeks to destroy the one who was favored, and that doesn't elevate you. It only tears the other person down, and in the end, you both fall flat. No one wins, everyone loses. The alternative to envy isn't denying your feelings. It's not pretending everything's okay when it's not. It's not forcing a smile and saying "good for you" when your heart is bleeding inside. The alternative is brutal honesty with yourself. It's saying, "Yes, I'm hurting. Yes, this affected me. Yes, I wish I had been recognized. And now, what do I do with this pain? I can transform it into fuel for improvement. I can use it as a diagnosis of what needs to change within me. I can let it show me where I'm vulnerable, where I'm failing, where I need to grow, or I can let it consume me. I can feed it with constant comparisons. I can ruminate on it until it turns into resentment, and then hatred, and then, who knows, destructive action. The path is yours. The choice is yours. It always has been. And here's something that needs to be said to those on the other side, to those who are the Abel of the story. Your integrity can spark envy. Your success can breed resentment. Your approval can cause pain in those who weren't approved. And that's not your fault. You shouldn't dim your light so as not to overshadow others. You shouldn't apologize for doing the right thing. You shouldn't sabotage your own offering so everyone else is on the same level. But you can be sensitive. You can be kind. You can reach out. You can share what you've learned. You can celebrate without arrogance. You can rise without kicking those below. You can be the brother Abel perhaps didn't have the chance to beat a Cain. Because who knows? Just who knows, if Abel had had more time, if he had realized Cain's pain, maybe he could have made a difference. But we'll never know, because envy didn't wait. It acted. And when envy acts, it's always too late. Abel's blood crying out from the ground is an image that has haunted human consciousness for millennia. It is the voice of innocence, destroyed. It is the silent cry of justice violated. It is the eternal testimony that evil does not remain hidden, no matter how well buried. How many times have you seen this? Secrets that come to light, crimes that are uncovered, injustices that do not remain silent. It may take time, it may take years, decades, generations, but the blood cries out, the truth emerges, and God hears, always has, always will. And this should be both a comfort to those who suffer injustice and a warning to those who commit it. You are not hidden. Your actions have witnesses, even if they are only the ground beneath your feet and the God above your head. And one day, there will be a reckoning. But the beauty, the fragile hope that shines through this dark story is that God still speaks to Cain. Even after the crime, even after the lie, even after the arrogance, God is there, talking, judging, yes, but not annihilating, not erasing, establishing consequences, but preserving life. And this tells us something fundamental about God's character. He doesn't give up easily, even when we give up on ourselves, even when we deserve to be discarded, even when there's nothing in us that warrants a second look. He still looks, still speaks, still seeks a way to reach the hardened heart. And if he did this for Cain, the first murderer, he does it for you, for me, for anyone willing to stop running and start listening. So after all this, after this journey through the oldest history of human violence, after exploring the dark corners of envy and the devastating consequences of unchecked anger, what remains? What is the message you take into your life today? It's simple, but not easy. You have a choice. You always have. You always will. When envy rears its ugly head, and it will, you choose how to respond. When someone is approved and you are not, you choose how to interpret it. When your offering is rejected, you choose your next step. And these choices, small and seemingly insignificant at the moment, are shaping the destiny of your life. They are determining whether you will be remembered as Abel, whose faith still speaks, or as Cain, whose mark remains as a warning. Or better yet, if you will be remembered as someone who almost became Cain, but chose differently. Someone who felt envy, recognized the danger, and conquered the sin that lurked at the door. This is real victory. Not to never feel envy, not to never be rejected, not to never fail, but to feel, to be rejected, to fail, and still choose the path of humility, of growth, of redemption, choosing to improve instead of destroy, choosing to rise instead of tear down, choosing to offer again with more sincerity, with more surrender, with more wisdom. Because the God who asked Cain, "If you do well, will you not be accepted?" is asking you the same question now. The door is open, the path is clear, the choice is yours. And if you're already the Cain of your own story, if you've done what you shouldn't have, if you've destroyed what can't be rebuilt, if you already bear scars that will never be erased, listen to this. There's still life after the mistake. There's still a path after the fall. There's still divine protection even in the midst of judgment. You will bear the consequences. You will live with the weight. But you don't have to live in eternal flight. You can stop. You can face it. You can embrace it. And you can build something. Even if it's small. Even if it's different from what you, dreamed. Even if it's on the rubble of what you destroyed. Because God didn't abandon even Cain completely. And he won't abandon you. Now it's time to decide. Will you let this story be just another old narrative you've heard and forgotten? Or will you allow it to be the mirror where you see yourself, where you recognize your own struggles, where you spot the danger signs before it's too late? Will you allow Abel's voice to still speak to you, teaching you about integrity? Will you allow Cain's mistake to be your warning, your wake-up call, your chance to choose differently? Will you hear God's voice asking, "Why are you angry?" And this time, unlike Cain, will you respond with honesty and humility? What you do with this story defines what it means to you. It could be just knowledge, another biblical fact stored in your brain, or it could be transformation, the moment you decided you would no longer be a slave to envy, that you would no longer allow comparison to steal your peace, that you would no longer let rejection define your worth, the moment you chose to do good, to offer your best, to conquer the sin that lurks at the door. Because this is the only way to honor both Abel and Cain. Honor Abel by living with integrity. Honor Cain by not repeating his mistake. And if you need one last push, one last word of encouragement or warning, here it is. The field still exists. Not the physical field where Abel fell, but the metaphorical field where we all face our crucial choices. You will be on that field soon, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. And when you are, when temptation comes, when envy whispers, when anger tightens your chest, when everything in you wants to destroy what you cannot have, remember, sin crouches at the door, but you can conquer it. You have that strength. You have that choice. You are not Cain unless you choose to be, and you don't have to choose to be. So tell me, what will you do differently now? How will you respond the next time you feel that pang of envy? How will you react when your offer isn't accepted? How will you treat those who achieved what you couldn't? Because these questions aren't rhetorical. They demand an answer, and your response, not in words but in actions, will determine whether you've learned something from the older history of violence or whether you're simply repeating the cycle. Leave your response in the comments. Share your experience with envy, with rejection, with the struggle of seeing others succeed while you didn't, and what you did with it, how you chose to respond. Because your story may be exactly what someone needs to hear to make the right choice. And if this content impacted you, if this journey through the story of Cain and Abel stirred something within you, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications because there are more stories like this, more truths hidden in the ancient narratives that illuminate our modern lives. And leave a like, not out of formality, but because by doing so, you're saying, this mattered to me, and it can matter to others too. The truth about Cain and Abel isn't just in the pages of Genesis. It's in the mirror you look into every morning. It's in the choices you make every day. It's in the silent war that rages in your heart when envy knocks on the door. And now you know, you can conquer it. You always could. The question is, will you?